Well, welcome everyone to the Under One Sky conference and one of our engagement workshops. These are designed as more intimate opportunities to go a little bit deeper in some of the subjects that we've been discussing. If we haven't met yet, my name is Ruskin Hartley, and I'm the Executive Director of the International Dark Sky Association. We're actually joined on this call by one of our board members, Tom Reinhardt. Thanks for joining us, Tom, and thanks for your volunteer leadership on the board. And people like Bill. Bill joined us as one of our chapter leaders up in Oregon. Great to see folks here. Today's workshop promises to be a great one because it's one of the topics that has been a consistent thread throughout the last 18 hours of this conference. What is the number we're up to in that is the whole relationship between light and safety and crime and safety. And we're fortunate to be joined by someone who knows a lot about this, Art Hushen. Art is the president of the National Institute of Crime Prevention. He's joining us today from Tampa, Florida, where he noted that he went out last night and could barely see the moon, let alone the stars out there. He combines a pretty special set of expertise. He's a 30-year retired law enforcement officer with a specialty in crime protection through environmental design. He founded the National Institute of Crime Prevention in 1999, and he also got exposed to dark sky advocacy and dark sky values, I believe, through some conversations that he was telling me recently down in Australia with some folks down there. And he brings this unique perspective of real understanding of the sort of law enforcement and safety aspects with the real values of dark skies. We've been fortunate to be engaging with Art through this for at least the past decade and re-engaged with him recently. Really appreciate all your time and effort to help us understand these really important set of issues more closely. We're up to about 31 participants, so I would suggest that people do, if they have questions, let's put those in the chat. I'll keep monitoring those, and we'll make sure we make time at the end to get to those. Thank you, Art. Please take it away.
Ruskin, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and a chance to talk about one of my favorite topics, crime prevention through environmental design. Thank you, everyone, for being out here. I know you had a lot of presentation been going through and a chance to see a variety of speakers, so I appreciate you coming to this particular session. CPTED, which we're going to talk about, crime prevention through environmental design, has been around since about 1971. Unfortunately, I didn't take it back then. I was still in high school at the time. So as it progressed and we saw a change occurring with it, we began to truly see the value as time progressed. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to a shared screen, and I want to provide a PowerPoint that I'll be doing as part of the presentation. And the PowerPoint, and hopefully you can see that in the background, let me get it going. We'll focus on the elements of CPTED and how we apply them, what we do with them as well, because CPTED as a strategy is really starting to take off. We see a big push for this, not only throughout the US, but in Canada. We see it in South America. We see it in Europe. We see it in Asia as well. I know we mentioned me learning about dark skies in Australia, and that was at a CPTED conference many, many years ago. One of the speakers was involved with dark skies early on, and that was probably in about 2001, I believe. So a chance to hear it and see what people are trying to do really opened my eyes up to the need of lighting, especially when we talk about lighting for safety. My background, again, that was kind of covered. I was just recently elected to the IES Security Lighting Committee. So I'll be working on that, trying to implement CPTED as one of the strategies as we begin to look at lighting standards and how we can codify those in such a way where it balances everything that we need. My emphasis has always been public safety. So again, that's my priority when I look at a site. But I understand the need to control that light. I understand we need to keep the light in certain areas, and we don't need to light up everything. It's kind of like the pendulum has been going both ways. A little too far, one decade, the next few years, it goes another direction. So what is that balance? And that's what I'm hoping we can accomplish this go around, especially working with the IES and then seeing what we can do with dark skies. The beginning of CPTED started in 1971, just a bit of information on it, by a criminologist by the name of C. Ray Jeffrey, who wrote the book called Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. It was the first use of the phrase CPTED. Now, in 1971, this wasn't really getting to too many people in the field every day. Since it was a criminology major, again, those that were involved in upper level academics were taking the courses, but it wasn't filtering down to people that were in the street or dealing with issues every day. C. Ray Jeffrey, when he came up with this concept, contended the way to prevent crime is to design the total environment. And that's in order to reduce opportunities for crime, not eliminate them, reduce those opportunities for crime. So as a CPTED practitioner, when I look at a site, I start blending a lot of elements together with this mindset: how can I make it difficult for the offender to commit the crime while still using strategies that encourages people to feel comfortable and continue to use that space? The more they use it, the more ownership, the fewer calls for police service and less crime. So there's that balance that we talk about. And when I work with city planners and architects, we try to codify those standards, whether at a city level or county level or state level. So this way, as developers come in, they understand here's the lighting standards that meet CPTED requirements, here's building standards, here's setback standards. Again, here's elements for a park design. And all of those really support the next activity, which again, trying to program the use of the space to bring people in to take ownership, especially when we're talking about nighttime use. And that's so important to us because we see our cities and how they're growing. We see our neighborhoods. People have different shifts. We look at universities. We look at parks, especially in cities, people use them at nighttime. What is that balance? What is that balance for lighting and safety? The goal of CPTED: reduce the opportunities for crime that may be inherent in the design of structures or in the design of neighborhoods. And this is accomplished through the involvement of CPTED practitioners in the planning, development, and design review of community projects. Go ahead. One thing I want to emphasize, though, I was up in Fort Collins about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, and we're doing this CPTED course, and Dark Skies was holding a neighborhood seminar in one of the communities. And I actually went out to participate in the seminar because the police department had set up a table there, and it was amazing to see what they were doing in the community. We saw the telescopes up, and I got some great photos at the event, but we talked a little bit about crime, what was occurring, and this was a well-established community. So when we began looking at lighting standards for this particular neighborhood, there wasn't a lot of reported crime. So again, we have to balance that with neighborhoods that might be high in crime, neighborhoods that have very little crime, communities that have very little crime. So again, that's a challenge for us as CPTED practitioners. Now, we try to get practitioners involved in the planning, development, and design review of all community projects. And that includes a lighting component too. Members of the communities I work with, when we ask them what type of lighting do you want, the response I normally get is, well, something that light up the neighborhood so I can see what's going on. And again, I don't want to take that for face value, say, well, let's just light it up. No, again, let's look at crime. Let's look at data. Let's look at the data that's provided. Let's provide the community input. Again, let's look at material that we're going to use for the site. What does our lighting engineers tell us? What are some of the requirements when we think about standards, and whose standards do we follow? So all those we have to address when we talk about reducing opportunities for crime, and using lighting as one of those strategies, one of those tools. CPTED is defined as a proper design and effective use of the built environment that can lead to reduction for incidents of crime and an improvement in quality of life. So first question we ask, what is proper design? And again, unless someone has that standard for us, I'm looking at new construction, because I'm not getting a lot of input from the residents at this point. Again, that's so key for us. Now, what is the building orientation? What is the setback? What we include front porches? What is the landscaping like? And again, that's so key for us when we think about lighting. You include a landscaping component, in some cases that leads to conflict. Let me give you an example of what my city did at the time to address lighting and landscaping. What we set by code was under our landscaping strategy following the 2-foot 6-foot rule, which means all landscaping below ground cover will not exceed 2 feet in height, lower tree canopy 6 foot and higher. Now, some of my other cities I work with will go 2'7". And again, then we adjust the lighting based off the landscaping. We'll look at the walkways and corridors, how people come through the space. And those are all key when we talk about proper design. Then we get into what is the effective use. I've designed this great space. So how do we use it? What programs do we have in place to engage the community to use the space? Remember, if people don't feel safe, they will not use that space. And that's where that conflict begins to begin. We have more calls for police service. We have graffiti starts to take over the site, less positive behavior occurring, and then it becomes a challenge. And the next response I get from the community is, let's just add more lighting. No, let's look at the underlying root of the crime. And then we begin to address that as we look at how we set those standards. So proper design and effective use are key for us. CPTED is based over four overlapping strategies. They are natural surveillance, natural access control, territorial reinforcement, and maintenance, as we call them the big four. Now, these apply in a variety of settings. This can be in a park, this can be in a neighborhood, this can be in a trail. Again, this can be in a downtown corridor or streetscape design. Natural surveillance, the ability to see what's taking place around me, daytime or nighttime. If we're using the space for activity, can I see what's taking place around me? Is it easy for me to do that? Natural access control. How do I bring people into the space using design strategies? Now, lighting is one of the strategies we use to bring people into a space. That lighting helps us with signage, wayfinding, and it also ties into what we call territorial reinforcement or ownership. Again, this space is managed by a particular group or a neighborhood or a park, and we take ownership of that space. But to do that, we have to be able to see what's taking place around us. To address that component, we look at a maintenance strategy. And that maintenance will address, for example, lighting issues that we might have occurring on the site, conflict between trees and lighting. If, for example, the tree canopy is getting a little too large and it's blocking the lighting, we begin to adjust that. So again, each one of these supports the other. Now, whether I'm looking at a neighborhood which applies natural surveillance or a park natural surveillance, can I see in the park? Can I see who's on the sidewalk? Can I see who's in the street? So again, we want to ensure that people can see that both daytime and nighttime. Using these strategies helps us do that. And the programs that are most successful, then we codify that or set it as a design standard, which is so important because who sets those design standards for us? Well, a lot of cases I have to work with city government or county government in order to do that. And once we have a plan in place, we have to have the ability, though, to change that as time progresses. So these are what we refer to as the big four. Now we have what we call CPTED supporting elements. Again, natural surveillance. Well, if I'm looking to improve natural surveillance, I have to start looking at, for example, my traffic calming. Again, I want people to feel comfortable as we share the space with automobiles. I have to look at wayfinding strategies. And again, wayfinding has to be pedestrian scale, so I can see where that signage is. And for nighttime use, it has to be illuminated. Otherwise, what reason do I even have having a sign there if we can't read it at nighttime? We look at transition zones to show ownership. Again, coming from public space to semi-public space or private space, two key elements that we have to address, and again, to go into more detail in just a little bit, is lighting, light trespass, and light pollution. That is listed in every assessment that we conduct. So when we do these training classes around the country, as we train people to go out and do these assessments, two areas they have to address as part of a graded presentation is what is lighting like on the site, what are their lighting standards, and is light trespass, light pollution, has that been addressed? And if not, what do you as a practitioner recommend to correct that? So again, we include this as part of our basic training for CPTED practitioners. Celebrated entryways, how do you come into the space? How does it connect to the adjoining neighborhoods? Or how does it connect to transit? Again, connectability covers all kinds of areas. Then we look at what's positive and negative activity generators on the site. Now, positive can tie into strategies, for example, like tactical urbanism, can tie into strategy like placemaking. As I take a space, I revitalize a space and I bring activities that the community wants to see, whether it's daytime or nighttime. At nighttime, I have to include a lighting plan for that as well, because I want people to feel safe and comfortable. Social management plays such an important part. Again, social management includes the programs that we have on the space that improves quality of life for everyone who's using that space. So again, in social management, we let the community provide the input of programs they want to see within that space. So again, we want them to take ownership. We want to free up the police so they don't spend a lot of time there. Again, we want them to say, this is our space, we take care of it. Daytime or nighttime, again, nighttime, we have to look at lighting. We also address light trespass, light pollution. So these are key areas to talk about CPTED and your CPTED supporting elements as well. Under the CPTED model, lighting has two purposes. The first one is for the illumination of human activity. Our priority is people. We go back to early on the 60s with Jane Jacobs, who was a community activist early on, who wrote the book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. How do I bring more eyes to the street? Now, if I design to bring more eyes to the street and program more activity to bring more eyes to the street, I want to be able to see who's on that street. So again, looking at human activity, lighting for that. The secondary purpose for lighting is for security. Now, we've all heard about security. We all talk about security. Again, what are the standards for that? Where do we put our cameras? But again, in CPTED, we don't get into that. We get into just good design strategies first, having codes that we can follow, and how do I help people feel safe using that site? So again, these are all elements we want to address as we go forward with our CPTED program. We have to deal with public perception. That is so important. That's where the conflict takes place today. When we think about dark sky standards, we think about city codes for lighting. Public perception of crimes of all kinds is rising. and the public safety faces a greater and greater threat. Now, I can attest to that. We've done training currently in 44 states here in the US. A lot of our CPTED training is what we call post-certified police officer standards and training. Architects and urban designers get CEU or CM credits for taking our CPTED training as well. So we get the input from all the different groups as far as what is safe and unsafe. But if you think about that, public safety faces a greater and greater threat. When you go to social media or listen to the news, what do you hear? Well, we hear a lot of, well, let's have fewer officers out there. And I'm not going to get into the whole strategy of defunding the police. But again, if we eliminate a lot of those first responders that are there, then that comes back to the community to bring eyes on the site and look what's occurring. Now, I understand saving the night sky. I've actually discussed this with several groups, and some of the conflict that I have, especially working with certain groups and working with the law enforcement side, is why do we need light? Again, I've had people respond, well, why do we need to provide street lighting when you can carry a flashlight? Why do we need to provide lighting on the street when cars have lights? But if I'm looking at public space, I want to comfortably be able to see 30 feet around me. And that's what I recommend, especially talking about park design and neighborhood design. So that transitions to landscaping as well. So I understand what we're trying to accomplish. But again, when the community's biggest outcry is public safety, public safety, public safety, we've got to find that balance. We've got to create that partnership. And we see the news and the media, what's happening. Is crime rising? Well, it depends on who you ask. You know, you've got all the research out there. Crime is on the rise. Crime is increasing. More police lead to more crime, less police solve crime. So again, we're going back and forth with that. But the fundamentals that are there is still, how do we design that space? So again, how do we get the lights in place, get the standards in place so my normal users can see what's taking place around them as they use that space? Now, the data, we can pull it from wherever we want to. I can pull numbers out to show, yes, crime increased at nighttime. We can break it down to age group. We can say juvenile crime decreased at nighttime, goes up in the daytime because juveniles aren't at night. Then we see violent crime occur. And again, just depends on where you're living. You know, some people in larger cities have peak hours of crime. Some in rural areas have less crime. What's the balance? If we're in the same county with the same jurisdiction, and I'm working with urban designers and lighting engineers, what is the standard across the board that we're going to see throughout the entire county or through the city? So again, that's a big concern for us when we're talking about public safety and lighting, public safety and CPTED. And you can take a look through the numbers that are there. And again, I'm sure we all have data we can pull from. But again, this is just try to set the tone of what's a priority for a community when we talk about public safety. When we talk about the groups that set lighting standards, what I like to highlight, and again, I'm not saying this is what we need to follow, but as we start looking at some of the requirements here, guide for lighting for people, property, and critical infrastructure, I highlight the book for a reason. As we start looking on the left-hand side of your screen, you start looking at all the chapters and all the sections that are included there. Now, this is recommended. We include this part of our training. Every person that takes our training gets access to this in our library, at least have some reference they can go to as far as lighting for a site. What I want to highlight, though, is IES and crime prevention through environmental design in Annex D. So in this particular publication, you see Annex D listing CPTED as one of their strategies. And for us that are involved in public safety, that's a big component to have, where now the lighting industry begins to see the value of CPTED and how we apply it. So this is what we hope to do as we create the partnerships, for example, not only with the IES, but with Dark Skies, with the American Planning Association, with the American Art Institute of Architects, with the Department of Education, with the National Park Service, because people want to have a point where they go, this is what we need. And if we can include that as a strategy and as a standard, I think we'll be even more successful as we start looking at changes to a site. So let's take a look at some of the lighting issues that we normally deal with. And a lot of these relate specifically to crime. So we're talking about maybe some densely populated areas. We're talking about, we got a lot of movement and activity. This one, it was one of the teams was doing an assessment of this site. And what I want you to focus on this one, can you describe the two individuals in the photo? I'm not even going to talk about cameras and physical security. I'm just talking about people walking through here and using the space. Can we identify the person in the background, the female? Yes, we can. I can clearly identify that person. Light complected, dark jacket, blue jeans, again, blonde hair. But as I cross the threshold from that stairway into the parking space where I have no lighting, can you identify the male person that's standing there? Well, I'm assuming it's a male. Again, I'm not very clear with that. Color of jacket, clothing, no. Any description? Not really either, because when I look at standards, we're really lighting up that stairway, but as they transition into darkness, dealing with dark adaptation, again, you start losing that connection. What did the person look like? I don't know. I can't tell you. They were big, but that's about all I can tell you with that one. So again, what we want to look at our strategies as we look at lighting, for example, in this space will be a parking garage. So again, that's the standard we want to look at. Other areas you want to address, for example, these are going to be a retail or commercial. We start like current lighting on site. And again, I had a team doing these assessments. So if I look at the lighting in place, middle halide, and we can all agree it's just a very poor design on the site, and it's just blasting the site with light. That's a response I get from people that are victims of crime. Can we light it up like a Christmas tree? Can we put floodlights throughout our entire property? And we're kind of, whoa, let's slow down just a bit. We still want you to identify who's there. So again, the proper fixture plays an important part. Now, can you describe the individual in this photo? And I know we're all looking, trying to go, okay, I know he's here somewhere. Well, we have an obstruction for the lighting, and that's going to be a trailer. And that dark spot is where the person is hiding. So again, we give you a different look, and you can see him hiding behind there. Now, we throw in crime data. We throw in calls for service. We talk about community input, where are crimes happening, where do you feel safe, where do you feel unsafe? And we realize this is a big concern for the neighborhood. So what lighting standards do I have in place to address that? Again, public safety is what we're really trying to look at when we think about some of these good design standards for the site. Another example, this is a community center. This is in the Salt Lake City area. So we had a team doing the assessment of this building. Again, taking a look at all the transparency in the front. If you zoom in just a bit, you see there's a camera right at the doorway, and this in the daytime. And again, so good visual connection both sides. I can see in, I can see out. But what about at nighttime? Since this is a community center, I know it's going to be used as late as 11 p.m., maybe even up to 12. So again, we're going to have people using space at nighttime. So what does this area look like at nighttime? A little bit different. So now I'm leaving a well-lit community center transitioning into darkness. And dark adaptation, we're looking about 20 minutes to adjust to that. So I look at crime data, I look at calls for service, I look at the community's concern, and I realize fear of crime is important here. So I understand, and with community input, well, can we improve the lighting in the parking lot? Because I've got the data to show me, yes, we've had incidents here. And that also affects my physical security, which again, not a CPTED strategy, but I just want to highlight that as one of the areas we focus on as well when we think about crime prevention and safety. One area we have to address minimally is going to be landscaping and lighting. I love tree communities. I love trees. I got trees in my backyard. Again, I look at lighting. How do I set my lighting up around the trees? And we all know, or I have a good understanding of CPTED, that trees help deter crime. Some of the studies done at University of Maryland in Baltimore, they did a comparison of two neighborhoods, demographics very similar, housing very similar. And what they found was that the street that had that tree canopy, it encouraged people to use their sidewalk, sit out on their stoop, interact with their neighbors, which brought more eyes to the street, which led to fewer crimes that tied into vandalism or criminal mischief. The street that had no trees, we had a lot of direct sunlight coming through. Again, people were less likely to sit out front, and they'd go somewhere else or maybe use their backyard. So I've got to balance that when we think about nighttime use, lighting, and tree canopy, because I don't want to lose those eyes on the street. And again, we want this to be a strategy that we follow and address every time we look at a site. So again, these are things we have to consider, working with our landscape architects, working with our engineers, working with our, again, urban planners, community input, what it's going to look like, nonprofits, social programs. Again, everyone has input on what it's going to look like, but what are those minimum standards? This is a campus city. So this one I had a team doing assessment on. And this is daytime use versus nighttime use. So in the daytime, my tree canopy is nicely done. We're following the 2 foot, 6 foot rule. I can identify a person walking up to me, and not to be offensive, not to say that person looks like they're going to commit a crime. No, but to see our neighbors, see our friends. Again, we're talking about social interaction that makes a place a place. And if I can't see my friends to go and interact with, well, I lose that social component. So I want to be able to see who's walking up. I want to provide amenities, for example, benches. I want to provide a kiosk. I want to get people out, for example, grab a coffee, get to talk to each other, because nothing beats safety in that community. So again, I want to design with that in mind. So let's take a look at the same corridor at nighttime. And then we see an entirely different look. Now I've got my call box right up on you see the blue light in the background, but what is creating those dark spots as I walk along this corridor? Well, trees and lighting. So you're going to have to look at placement of those as well. So as much as I want to talk about the night sky, which I really do, but I also want to address the area of safety. And here, a better shot of this, you can see where the light is placed right in the tree. And if you think about area of concealment, that is a spot that an offender would stage to commit the crime. So how do I separate those? What codes do I have in order to do it? And if I don't have the codes, it's left up to the designer. We're just going to keep repeating the same thing over and over and over again. And we see the calls for service that'll just kind of keep that high. We have to look at other ways to address it. I don't want to get into too much physical security because that's not what CPTED is. It's about including people in the design process. You know, we can secure a spot, and you want to think about target hardening, we can do that over and over and over again. There's not a lot of value in that other than, yeah, we made it harder for offenders to be successful by target hardening the site. No, and then people don't feel comfortable using that. So again, we want to blend these in such a way that people don't even realize the safety and security is there. They're just having a nice time. They're getting to know each other, talk to each other, and they're enjoying the use of the space. Here's some good examples. We have some conflict based off materials that we use. This is in Gainesville, Florida. The University of Florida had a team doing the assessment here. If I take a look at the inside, this is a YMCA. If I look from the outside in, we can see everything that's happening within the shop. So again, that's a good thing. So if the clerk needs help, people can respond to that. Now, if you look at the photo right at the right-hand side, this is what my clerk sees from the inside out. In a lot of ways, they might address that. Well, I can't see out. Well, let's provide brighter lighting on the street. No, let's look at the material on the windows. Let's look at balancing that out. Let's decrease the lighting on the inside just a bit. Again, there's a strategy that we have to address as we go from site to site. And again, that's what I deal with, or what we deal with when we think about application of public safety, lighting, and CPTED standards. Glare, uniformity, and fixture design are so important to us when we look at a site. And here's a great example in a park setting. Again, you see this quite a bit, lighting on the left-hand side, lighting on the right-hand side. And I talk to park designers and park planners, and I tell them, you can do this right now. You can start setting lighting standards right now as far as fixture design, as far as placement, as far as uniformity levels, Kelvin temperature, CRI. There's so many things we can do, and we can set it right at the beginning. So knowing any new construction or major renovation, we can address now. But people just don't have a good understanding of CPTED and how to apply it. Those that do begin to apply it right away. They see the value and they start making the changes. But again, when you think of CPTED, what's the first thing comes to your mind? What's a crime prevention program? Well, yes, it is, but it goes into much more detail than that. So again, it's just talking to people how to make it work. And again, once they understand the concept, 99% say, why haven't we set that as a standard? Why haven't we moved forward with it as well? Glare, uniformity, fixture design, photo on the left, had a team doing an assessment of this property. Again, this is part of one of the training units, and we just see glare everywhere. And that's new construction. New construction, how can that happen today? But we see it still, and this is in my state now, we're talking about Florida. We just see this over and over and over again. And when the business owner comes back later, or people using this space, first thing they ask was, why was the light done that way? Well, there was no standard in place to address that, and no one conducting the site plan to review to ensure compliance with the code. Now, what we recommend as part of it, and again, this is just based off our partnership, is we look at cutoff fixtures for the site. We look at ISNA standards for that site as well. Photo on the bottom right-hand side, again, we look at LED lighting, cutoff fixture. We see the transition from LED in the background or deeper in the photo, you see high pressure sodium. So a lot of people are happy just to say, hey, we got rid of high pressure sodium, we have LED, good job, let's go. No. Back up a bit. What kind of LED? What are we looking at? Again, how much light do we need for pedestrians to use the space? What is crime like? So again, so many questions go unanswered, but working with city government, a lot of times, I just hear that we got LED, we're good to go. We have to really look into that, and education is so important, especially when we talk about city government and those that actually write the standards. So again, we want to participate in those programs. So what we try to do, and here's an example of something we call Municode, and I have a chance to help write codes and standards for municipalities. A lot of CPTED practitioners are starting to do that now based off their cities. So here's a good example on one of the codes that I kind of copied in place here. Overhead light poles may not be placed in roadway medians, traffic islands, or parking lots planted with shade trees or other canopy-producing species. Only basic crown cover, included but not limited to hedges and shrubs, may be used. So what we're telling the city or the county with this one is you cannot combine trees and lights in the same space. It's not allowed. It's against the code. Now, if I want to add light, I've got to come up with some creative solution to address that in order to meet the codes, or we separate that entirely. Then we look at the height, pedestrian scale. Then we look at the shielding or the fixture design. These are all components that have to be looked at. But for us to get that done, first thing we have to address is code. And again, we see more and more planners adopting these. And again, it's just getting the word out. And that's where we seem to have the most problem doing and getting people to understand here's how CPTED works for you.
We have about 15 minutes, Art. And I know we have a few questions as well. So,
okay, I'll get these last two out and then we'll go to the questions. So here's a typical example. This is in Nevada. I had a team doing assessment. This is a transit station. And what they're dealing with on the site was human trafficking, drug sales, theft, robbery, assault, and battery. Their response to address that was what? Flood the area with lighting. That, and again, I understand why they did that because they're just the safety component was such a big factor. But did they ask anyone else about this? No. The whole emphasis was target hardening, security. So again, this is just some example what we deal with daily as far as trying to come up with some solutions or strategies. Here's the crime stats for the site. And then again, this is the data we put together. 167 reported crimes within 1,500 feet of the address in 180 days. So again, this is what we're dealing with. We go site to site. Now, one, before we actually get into some of the questions, was this just appeared in the New Yorker. They're looking at a documentary that's coming out. And we talk about what politicians see in lighting and the community. So just briefly, this tied into some of the public housing in New York. When they added these lights, and we're talking about lumens that were off the chart to light up the space, provision of street lights led to a minimum to a 36% reduction in nighttime outdoor index crimes. If I'm government, what a great job. We've solved crime, we're addressing crime. But it did not address quality of life for people living in that corridor that was just overwhelmed with lighting. So that had a negative impact on the community, but the numbers say crime dropped. So seeing that, what we see are emphasis for this: light your way to safety, light up your parking lot, safety lighting, purpose of lighting, cut night crime by adding more lighting, light the night, lights on for safety, light up the night. Light reduces crime. Why do we light? Exterior lighting for the role in safety and security, and we see it over and over and over again. People don't understand as far as the application of lighting. They look at it as a great way to solve crime. Some of our standards that we try to focus on: color rendering index, CCT must be considered, crime analysis, calls for service, user interviews. One thing I want to emphasize though, public safety is the utmost importance. We talk about lighting standards in the site. So what's your solution? Well, we talk about international dark skies and CPTED. Think about ways we can address that. Maybe look at that minimum lighting standards or that ground that we're looking at as far as coming with an agreement as far as what is the best light for the size. So that kind of wraps it up for you. Just a quick presentation on that for CPTED. So hopefully it gave you some ideas of what we're trying to accomplish using CPTED strategies.
Great, that was fabulous. Thank you so much, Art. You covered such a lot in a short period of time. As you might imagine, we do have some questions, and feel free to continue dropping them in the chat. Maybe we can start with a question that Friedel Pass posed, which is the kind of classic one: is lighting up to see what is happening, but more than 80% of the time there's nobody there, there's nobody around. So what is the benefit of lighting in the case where nobody is around? The criminal can also see better and do it faster. So what's that relationship between lighting up places where there is no one and lighting it up so the criminals can see which house to go and burglarize?
Exactly, and that's what you have to be what we call site specific. Again, why do I want to light up a space where there's no witness potential, there's no eyes on the street? Again, we can use technology to address that. Well, I see a lot of cities switching to motion activation lighting, which again, now as residents see the light turned on, they're like, oh, someone's moving in the park, let's take a look. And it brings the eyes out. So again, we want to have a general standard, but again, we have to be site specific. So again, I hope you see that. And I understand if no one's using the space, why do we waste the energy lighting that up? And I agree with you. Maybe some other strategies as far as motion activation would help with that one.
Yeah. And then to follow on from that, since you mentioned motion control, maybe you could talk, Jessica asked a question about what is the role of motion sensor lighting in CPTED. And also there's a lot of discussion at the moment about dimming and smart controls, and basically the realization that the number of people out at probably 8 p.m. is different from the number of people out at 3 a.m. So how is CPTED starting to look at sort of control lights and smart lights?
And again, control lights, smart lights, especially if you have just what is the minimum amount of light I need as a resident to see out. Now, if I'm going to use that in conjunction with technology or motion activation, again, that improves the witness potential, that alerts residents. And again, if there's nothing there, the light decreases again. So controls play an important part of that. If a city that's active 24 hours, do I need that? But if I have a rural area where, again, I have no one moving, I don't need that. So again, it's a balance, site specific. And that's where we're kind of falling short, because we're trying to just put it all in one basket and say this is how it fits. But again, we have to have that flexibility to see the changes or what we need to do.
Yeah. There's a couple of questions from Lucas and Friedel about kind of light setting the stage for vandalism, and the concept, if you're going to go out and do it, you want people to see it, you want to see your tag and your artwork to be recognized. So how does CPTED think about that? And some studies that maybe indicate that if there's no lights, it's no fun to vandalize, and therefore there's less issues.
Yeah, and you're right about that, especially you're talking about, let's say, an industrial complex where I have no people. Remember, prior to CPTED is illumination of human activity. If I have nobody using the space except for the offender, why do I need the light there? Now, so again, I've got to balance that out. Will light, in some cases, encourage someone to vandalize a site? That's a possibility. I understand that. Does it happen a lot? Well, we're not addressing the fundamentals of the neighborhood or the site itself. Does the community take pride in ownership of the space? If a building is tagged, is it removed quickly because of that ownership? Because now the community takes responsibility. I think we look at lighting as as a catch-all when there's so many other areas that need to be included: community participation, community buy-in, ownership. So yeah, if I don't have the buy-in, yeah, you're going to get the graffiti to be vandalized.
Yeah, I think what we've observed is lighting often becomes the sort of the scapegoat and the cheap solution to underlying problems that are more complex to exist, to challenge. There's a question from Jessica, which is one that we often get, which is how are the standards set? How are the decisions made in terms of what is an appropriate level of illumination or an appropriate level of color? And I think what's underlying that is the feeling that a lot of it is based upon kind of a hand-waving argument of putting a finger in the air as opposed to looking what the evidence and the data might suggest.
Right, and they're not looking at the data all the time. And I'll tell you, most agencies, most city governments, most county governments, most state police agencies, most county jurisdictions, the source that we constantly reference is IES. We always come back to IES because that's what a lot of our city zoning codes are based off of as well. So that is the one resource that we have a concept with that we can go to and say, how much light do I need for my site? What does the IES tell me? You need so many foot candles. So, and that is just part of standard training. So again, but that is the only resource that we have. Now, dark skies, what a great opportunity to address that as we begin to start looking at some of the standards in, what is the balance? What's that line that we can look at? So again, that's the main source I can tell you. Law enforcement, government, military, that's where they all go to. Park design, that's what they go to, IES standards.
Yeah. Just to follow up on that, I mean, there are actually two sort of IES standards. There's the IES standard, which are the recommended practices for most designs, and there was you referred to the lighting for security and safety, and which often prescribes much higher levels of lighting. So maybe you could talk a little bit about why there's a discrepancy there and how we can narrow that gap over time.
The IES standard for safety, again, critical infrastructure. Just saying critical infrastructure kind of puts fear in people because now we're talking about Homeland Security, we're talking about terror mitigation, we're talking about robbery, violent crime. Now, my city, if I look at my neighborhood design, it has different standards. Now we're talking horizontal versus vertical. Now, if I'm looking at, for example, vertical, now I'm looking at a federal facility, camera placement, facial recognition. So again, that's the difference between the two. And when we provide the training, we tell people, this is what the city recommends for your neighborhood. This is what Homeland Security and physical security recommends for your community. So again, it's just a difference in the two, and we just have to be aware of how we enact it as part of the code or make the recommendation.
Yeah. Just anecdotally, I spoke with a local lighting designer here in Tucson, and his comment is he often talks with his clients about there are these two standards, and he describes the difference, and he has never had one client actually choose the one purely for security. They've always chosen the one for placemaking.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I agree. It's the best one. It is the best one.
There's also a question from Lucas about speed and CPTED, and does CPTED get into the issues of controlling speed and design for sort of vehicle and pedestrian interactions and make recommendations in that space?
Oh, yes. Under that Department of Transportation that we work with, we look at intersections and corners. Again, and regardless how we light it, again, we have to look at fixture design. If I have pedestrians and bicyclists sharing the same space, I want to illuminate at least onto the sidewalk where the pedestrian is waiting to cross. So again, and people say, well, the headlights should pick them up. And I understand that too, but I want pedestrians to feel safe as well. That as they're waiting in the corner, they see the light over themselves. They've got people approaching them. And again, we always come back to follow that standard, which would be Department of Transportation. Does it help? Yes, good lighting helps. Let me just emphasize that. Good lighting helps. But again, what is the foot candle that we're looking for? Or lux? What's the standard we need to have too? But from what I've seen working with neighbor community groups, yes, lighting does help when we talk about traffic calming and safety.
Yeah. There's a question from Mike that I'm going to interpret. But Mike Cham says, often I see the idea of using lighting is to deter crime through invoking fear of being caught in a perpetrator rather than increasing use of an area by non-criminals. CPTED is a good idea, but does it really address the issue of fear? And maybe to kind of rephrase that question, from all the work that you've done, is there evidence that when you put CPTED in place, you actually have good outcomes by increasing positive use of it and do it in a way that actually minimizes glare and light trespass and light pollution?
Oh, absolutely right. When we talk about a site too, and we've all seen it, where you look at a facility where the lights are just so bright and glaring out at you. Again, what's so inviting about that? I'm going to avoid that as much as I can. Now, if I look at a warm light, look at a cutoff fixture, provide the venue for people to interact socially, again, program activities there to create that ownership, and trying to create that sense of place, coming back to placemaking, then I can see where lighting works. But again, what is a warm light? What is the temperature we're looking at? What about that fixture? Do I have trees blocking the light too? But it all comes down to the makeup of the community. Will they support the initiative to activate that space?
Yeah. It's also a question about the relationship between light and night vision equipment for security and surveillance. And I heard a story recently in Salt Lake City, where they had gone around and worked with the police department, and the police department started to understand that the very glary lights were blowing out their cameras. But I'm curious, kind of what's the current state of sort of CPTED and sort of camera and surveillance technology that is becoming so all-pervasive?
Yeah, we have a lot of security professionals from groups, for example, ASIS, that come in for the training in the military, Homeland Security. And again, they're seeing the issues with lighting in their camera technology too. They don't want to spend a ton of money to upgrade the cameras or provide additional shielding. So again, they start looking at, well, let me change the lighting out instead. That might be a little cheaper. And that's where we get the conflict too. So even security professionals have to understand, here's your technology, here's lighting technology. How do we combine them in a successful way? So yeah, you're right. Sometimes it just becomes such an issue that they lose the quality of that camera entirely.
So in closing, I wanted to come back to the sort of, I think your last series of 2 or 3 slides were really provocative in terms of the way that the lighting industry is selling light as a solution to perceived questions of security and personal and public safety. What's your advice and thoughts about how we start to turn that around? Because they have got very large marketing budgets behind those things. We would like them to sell good lights rather than bad lights. So how do we start to address this?
That is I think education is the key. And again, the conflict, again, and I love dark skies. I mean, we've been involved. When I'm talking with a group and I have someone come in and say, you don't need lighting, you have a flashlight, and these people's house has just been burglarized. Again, fear has taken over their response, and that just creates the conflict right away. If we can just get through the fear and say, okay, I understand a crime has happened, what changes can we make to address that? Because they don't want to hear about all this other, they just want, how do I make my property safe? Once we can address that in more of a, I don't want to say humane way, but in a conversational tone, I think we're really get ahead. But it's just maintaining this dialogue in such a positive way where, yeah, crime's an issue. Again, and so is saving what we want to see. Where can we meet in the middle? Education. The lighting industry, I'm not picking on the lighting industry, but I don't think they're going to help us to the level we need to go, because I understand, let's light it up with federal budgets and federal mandates are meeting. But I think dark skies is a great resource to really see the value of both coming together.
So what's your closing thoughts? You got a great group of dark sky advocates listening in from around the world and coming from very many different perspectives. I mean, how can this group of people get more knowledgeable about this area and start to break down some of these these misperceptions, I guess, that are out there in the world. What's your advice there?
And what I like to say too is just understand people are afraid. You know, when we talk about crime, I'm not saying everyone's hiding in their house, but again, people are worried about crime. We see the numbers that one study we did for schools was 52% of kids under 18 are worried about an active shooter in a school. That's big. That's half the entire kids going to school are fearful of that. So yeah, and we know we have to address that. So fear of crime is so important. We just cannot forget it and just kind of put it under the rug as we try to make the changes in lighting. But just show a little compassion. Say, what can we do together to make this work?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Art. In closing, I mean, what I like about your approach is it has so many parallels with where we have seen advocates be successful in dark sky advocacy. And really, it's about going in and talking and learning from communities and showing and illustrating the impact of different lighting, as opposed to all too often what happens is decisions are made and then solutions are dropped in and parachuted in on communities. And I think that example in New York that you shared is a great example of that. And I think it's really about going in and building those relationships in the way that you did and doing that hard work that over time will kind of turn this ship around. So again, I wanted to close by just thanking you so much for spending some of your, what is it, Saturday morning?
Saturday, yeah.
In Tampa, a safe trip, traveling out to California to educate more people about how quality lighting can be part of the solution to great communities and reducing light pollution over time. Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us. We have a short break here. Let me just pull up our conference schedule. We have 2 sessions left. We hope that you will join us shortly for our virtual awards reception and cocktail hour that's happening at 12:45 PST, which is just over an hour. That is 8:45 UTC for those of you who like to use universal time. Meet some of the awards receptions, an opportunity just to bring a drink and celebrate and meet some other friends. And then at 2 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. UTC is our global closing session, where we're going to reflect a little bit on what we've been discussing over the last 24 hours. And then we're going to be joined by 2 of the INET's 600 humans who have now flown into space. Ron Garan and John Grunsfeld are going to share some of their thoughts about what this looks from above. And John Grunsfeld is probably best known for his role of fixing the Hubble telescope so that it can bring us many of those incredible images of the world and the universe around us.
Yeah.
So thanks everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you back here later. Thanks, Art.
Thank you.